I was trying to think about what I could share with you guys this morning before you deliberate and look at things. And when I was in high school, my youth leaders challenged me to memorize Scripture. Some of you have already told me this week that you were blessed by the Navigator's topical memory system, and I was part of that. And so there's two verses that have stayed with me over the years, and I wonder why that is. And I think it's because I struggle, I don't know about you, but because God's given me some opportunities that some people never get, and because I've had a lot of just blessings in my life, the two-edged sword of that is it's easy to start feeling entitled. It's easy to start becoming proud. And so every day I struggle with pride. And so these verses that I'm going to share with you, I call hope for proud people. And it's 1 Peter 5 and 6. And I know a lot of you guys know them, but it might be good for us just to review them this morning. And here's what it says. Clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility toward one another. For God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time He may exalt you. Now in these verses, over the last, I memorized these when I was 16, so that's 40 years ago. I've come to understand there's three things about these verses that mean a lot to me. One is I see an illustration, and then I see a spiritual law, and then I see an invitation. The illustration, if you ever look at the definition of an illustration, it means to furnish a picture or make clear by example. So Jesus illustrates humility the night before He's crucified. And Peter is looking back on his memories of being with Jesus, and he uses this word picture when he says, clothe yourselves. That word means to wrap around or to tie on. And he's remembering that night when he and the other disciples were arguing over who was greatest. And none of them were willing to take up the servant's towel, and Jesus walks in and without saying a word, ties on the towel. And he walks around and he begins to wash their feet. Now, we probably have no appreciation for the Middle Eastern understanding of that. But there was no lower job that you could have taken. Jesus does that, and you may remember Peter balked and said, this isn't right. And Jesus says, let me do it. I have something I'm trying to furnish you, an example that I want you to never forget. And after he's done, here's what he says to the disciples. Do you understand what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly, I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. So Jesus was furnishing this example, and Peter's remembering that. So he says, clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility toward one another. And the verb tense is do this over and over and over. Clothe yourselves, keep clothing yourselves. Now, I don't know about you, but what Jesus did is he walked in that room and he basically said, what can I do for these guys? Not what can they do for me? What can I do for them? And I have to fight that mentality all the time. I just, because so many people have done so many things for me, I just sometimes fall into this pattern where I go, keep it coming, rather than saying, what can I do for them? Or God, what do you want me to do for this person? Even as I'm listening to them talk sometimes, is there anything I should do, God, you want me to do? When I was first married, Trish and I lived in the upstairs of a little one-bedroom apartment of a house that her dad owned. And we had only been married a few weeks, and so I remember in those days, before any kids, we only had a few dishes. I mean, like when the meal was over, my mom had taught me to always walk my dishes over to the sink, so I did that. And there weren't that many, and so I thought to myself, I wonder what I'm going to do now. Maybe I'll go watch TV. And all of a sudden, I realized that I was leaving my wife in the kitchen. We had no dishwasher. And all of a sudden, across the ticker of my mind, I heard the Lord just impress this phrase, Jeff, take up the towel. And I knew he meant dry the dishes. Stay here with your wife. Talk with her. Be with her. Don't just say, what do I want to do? And I remember thinking, wow, what an incredible, he was basically saying, clothe yourself, Jeff. Tie it on. Wrap yourself with that kind of heart. So that's the first thing, is an illustration. The second thing we see here is a spiritual law. It tells, Peter says, here's why this is important. You need to know this is a spiritual law. This isn't just work in Sunday school and church building. This is a spiritual law. For God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Now, I don't know about you, but when I think of God opposing me, I don't know if I want a life like that. And whenever I think of God opposing someone, I think of the Egyptians chasing the Israelites close to the Red Sea. You remember what it says in the Bible there? It says the wheels started coming off. I think that's probably why we have that phrase in our culture nowadays. They literally, the sand, they were just getting, they weren't making any progress. Now, I think that sometimes when we decide to be proud, it works for a while. But it doesn't work for very long. And eventually, we find ourselves literally opposed to God's very character. It's not like God says, I'm going to be mean to proud people. It just means my character will always oppose that attitude. Now here's what I want you to know. God is no respecter of persons. He opposes proud people that are Christians or proud people that are not Christians. It's just His nature. And I don't know about you, but the longer I live, I'm glad He opposes the proud. I'm glad He can't stand pride in me anytime He spots it. Because we're usually the last people to know it when we're proud. And we're the last people to see it. But anybody around us knows how much it smells. You know, pride comes before a fall. So it's a good thing that God opposes that. But notice there's a word of grace in here. But He gives grace to the humble. That's why I call these words hope for proud people. Is because it means that we can actually experience grace. I don't know about you. I want grace in my home. I want grace in my work. I want grace in my relationships. And the Bible tells us that this is a spiritual law. That just like gravity, it'll work like that for humble people. It'll never work like that for proud people. The last thing I see in here is not only an illustration and a spiritual law, but an invitation. So he says, okay, if you know this, then here's the invitation. Humble yourselves. It doesn't say be humbled. It says humble yourself. Make a choice. Make a choice. And whenever we think of humility, a lot of people think that that means that we need to think less of ourselves. But you know, C.S. Lewis put it well, that's not what it means. It means thinking of ourselves less. It just means now seeing ourselves properly under God and thinking of God and what He's up to in His kingdom and what He's wanting me to think about. And it's also seeing how important other people are in His economy as well, but humbling myself. So, therefore, humble yourselves so that at the proper time, God may lift you up or may exalt you. You know, Jesus taught this all the time in the parables. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles themselves will be exalted. And so this idea of humbling myself, my dad, Tom, you've heard this, Jimmy, you've heard me tell this, because this has been so influential in my life. My dad's a pastor. He's 80 years old now. My dad was a really good preacher, and my dad helped a lot of people live the Christian life. But the thing that touched my life the most is what he was at home. And I was a tough kid. My family even calls me high maintenance as a nickname. I was a tough kid to raise because I was pretty willful. So I understand why sometimes my dad got exasperated with me. But I remember sometimes my dad would send me to my room, and sometimes I can still picture this hallway in our home in Danville, Illinois, where he would sometimes just spank me all the way down the hallway and just say, okay, now get in your room, okay? And I remember thinking sometimes he threw an extra one in. You know what I'm saying? And so I'd go and lay on my bed, and I remember thinking that because he just got me mad. And so I'd lay on my bed, and I'd thinking, if he thinks I'm ever going to love him again, freeze him out and all that. And I'd be laying there in the bed and thinking, God, I've got a case against this guy. But more times than I can count, my dad would come in. And he would say to me, Jeff, I think you knew that I needed to discipline you. But the spirit that I just disciplined you was not like Jesus wanted me to have. Would you please forgive me? I believe that the reason I'm a follower of Christ today is because of the consistent way he practiced humility. I saw God get to my dad, and I saw my dad make a choice to choose humility. And now when I struggle with pride, and I do, and in some ways, the longer I walk with Christ, the more I struggle with pride. I remember an illustration of our Lord. I remember that there's a spiritual law that I cannot neglect. And I remember there's always an invitation that invites me to grace. And so you guys, you lead companies, you're business leaders. God has prospered you. Take heed, lest you fall, if you think you stand. And regularly look for opportunities to clothe yourselves, first with your family, and then with those that you work with. And I pray that your life will have the same impact on other people that my Father has had on mine. Thank you so much.